is the fact that in a strong dollar environment, Asia EM underperforms 80% of the time. And so I think the lineup is actually relatively clear. The goal then, and of course I would say this as a company analyst, the goal then is to look underneath the index and understand the rotational trades that are presenting themselves. The good thing is we see a lot of those opportunities around the region.
Is it overly simplistic to say, look, we need to be exposed to and owning those markets in this region that have strong domestic drivers that are relatively ring-fenced from the external challenges?
Necessary but not sufficient. Again, this concept of looking under the index is critical for our view on a go-forward basis, and I'll give you one example. The easy explanation of the election is China stock market is unattractive. That's easy, but also potentially wrong. If you look at performance at a subsector level since the U.S. election, you've seen multiple subsectors in the China tech stack perform very, very well, up 15%. Right? Why is that? Because the Chinese government is very focused on self-sufficiency, particularly in the technology space, because of the emerging geopolitical environment. So again, the domestic demand function is a critical trade. There's lots of other sub-trades, particularly at a subsector level around the region, once we start to dig into the details.
All right, so under the hood, now let's get into that, James. You got to figure in a rising rate environment and higher yields, more likely than not, banks out here are going to do well. Agreed?
Absolutely, and you've seen that. But again, the bifurcation is important. You've seen North Asia perform less well. You've seen some of the South Asia banks, and so or developed market banks. So you've seen Japan, here in Singapore, you've seen very strong performance. Australia, the flip side of that is you've seen banks, in particular in markets like Korea or China, significantly less performance. And so again, the criticality of looking beyond the headline and doing the bottoms-up work, I think, is going to be incredibly important for investors for the next 12 to 24 months.
If Trump goes wild with tariffs, if he is unleashed 60% plus 10% on the rest of the world, then arguably very trade-dependent, open, cyclical economies like us in Singapore, we get hit. How badly?
So if you look at ASEAN as a block, it's going to be interesting to watch. Yes, the downside risks are very evident, and I would add to the sort of the obvious risks with the fact that if China can no longer effectively export to the West, they're going to look to refocus those exports somewhere else. And so the potential to see a significant increase in China exports, particularly into the ASEAN region, which will reduce the competitiveness of domestic champions across a lot of the ASEAN markets. And so there's spillover effects, not only from the primary impact, but also secondary and tertiary impacts.
Is there also, it's a very interesting point, James, and to ASEAN's favour, is there also a data center story there that still has legs to it, or if chips become collateral damage, then do we get swept up in all of that? So
we're at JP Morgan, we're actually much, I guess, less negative on the Asia tech space than some, on the argument that a strong dollar will be very, very good for exports to the U.S., particularly from Japan, Korea, Taiwan, and so it's a little bit more of a North Asia focus. The fact of the matter is, particularly if the U.S. administration starts to scale back the subsidies involved in the CHIPS Act, there's no other game in town other than Asia semiconductor manufacturers in particular. And so the idea that the incoming U.S. administration might be negative for Asia tech is one that we'd have some issue with, and we think that there's a longer conversation there. From a data center perspective, we do think it's critical to look at the local realities, in particular from a power and cooling perspective. Yes. And so the water scarcity that you're seeing in markets like India are a really important part of this story, and it's one of the reasons why Malaysia has been so central to the incremental data center build, because they have relatively abundant power at a low cost, because they have abundant water, which markets like India just don't have in abundance. And so again, we have to look at the bottoms-up stories in each of these markets very carefully.
Yeah, we haven't gone